Hello, everyone, and welcome to this presentation on emotional intelligence and healthy relationships. My name is Jeremy Joseph, and I am the Assistant Director for the Office of Care and Civility and Student Affairs. And this presentation today is going to be centered around healthy relationships. Relationships is something that is a part of every aspect of life. We have a relationship with ourselves. We have relationships with friends, relationships with co-workers, relationships with family. Essentially, there's relationships in every aspect of life. And so I think it's very important to just consider and think about, what does a healthy relationship actually look like? And so with today's presentation, I really just want to take some time and discuss healthy relationships and see how healthy relationships correlate, what role emotional intelligence plays in healthy relationships. So thank you for taking the time to join today. Here is the layout for the presentation. And I really just want to hit on three main components. The first one being giving an overview of emotional intelligence. Describe and define emotional intelligence, what that is. I'm assuming that the majority or whoever's listening may have a little bit of a knowledge on emotional intelligence, but also this may be the first time hearing about emotional intelligence. It is a kind of a trendy word now. Emotional intelligence has taken off, essentially. But a lot of people don't really know what that is. So I just want to spend some time talking about emotional intelligence and what that looks like. And then the second component is going to be describing the emotional intelligence model. What is the model consist of, and breaking that down a little bit further. And then lastly, spending the remaining time showing how emotional intelligence correlates with healthy relationships, discussing what that looks like in a little bit more detail, kind of breaking that down and going a little bit more in depth in the interpersonal realm of healthy relationships and emotional intelligence. So before we dive into emotional intelligence, I'd like to share an article I came across from the Harvard Business Review titled "The Price of Incivility." This was a catchy title for me because I work for the Office of Care and Civility. But essentially, the article is about the impact of relationships in the workplace and how incivility impacts relationships in the workplace. And so what the article does is it takes a poll of about 800 managers and employees across about 17 different industries. All of the managers and employees are on the receiving end of incivility, which is essentially uncivil behavior. And it showed that incivility in the workplace creates a negative response from these employers and managers. Not only does it create a negative response, but it showed that there was a lack of creativity. Also, there was a decline in performance. And there was a shift in team morale. So there was a deterioration in team spirit. And the overall result was that because of incivility in the workplace, there was damaged relationships. And I think that the article shows us the importance of relationships, because when there's not a healthy relationship, these are a few of the examples of what results when there are unhealthy relationships at play. I would like for you to take a brief moment and think about the people around you. I want you to think about some of the qualities, some of those characteristics of the people that you consider supportive. So just take a brief moment and reflect on that. Some of the characteristics that come to mind for me are qualities of loyalty, of honesty, of trustworthiness, someone that displays respect, is somebody that's empathetic, that's a good listener, somebody that's authentic, one who is genuine. These are just to name a few. But I think that these characteristics that we think of show us a picture in our mind of what a healthy relationship looks like, a positive example of that. And so, what is EQI? What is emotional intelligence? Emotional intelligence is a set of emotional and social skills that influence the way that we perceive and express ourselves, that we develop and maintain social relationships, the way we cope with challenges, and also the way that we use emotional information in an effective and meaningful way. All right, so we just defined emotional intelligence. Let's consider what emotional intelligence is not. Emotional intelligence is not aptitude. Aptitude is concerned with a person's ability to perform well, maybe in a particular technical skill or activity, or maybe a discipline. Emotional intelligence is not achievement. Achievement is concerned with specific sorts of performance. Emotional intelligence is also not vocational interest, which is centered around the focus of a particular field of work. And then lastly, emotional intelligence is not personality. Personality is a unique set of traits that really help form a person's characteristics, a person's way of thinking, feeling, how a person behaves. And personality is the concept that I believe is most confused with emotional intelligence, but it's different. Personality is fixed, whereas emotional intelligence can be improved. Now let's take a look at the difference between IQ and EQ. IQ is essentially the measure of an individual's intellectual, analytical, logical, and rational abilities, whereas emotional intelligence is the personal, social, and survival aspect of overall intelligence. And so with that being said, when you look at emotional intelligence, it's really a better predictor and more important in overall success. Another thing to note and point out here is that emotional intelligence is the trust to build productive relationships. And we're talking about correlating emotional intelligence and healthy relationships. And emotional intelligence is key to building those healthy relationships. And then lastly, I just want to hone in on that last bullet point here, which says emotional intelligence is a skill, and skills can be learned. And so the good thing about this is that if your emotional intelligence is low right now, there's hope, because emotional intelligence can be improved. It can be learned. It can be developed. So let's look at emotional intelligence through the lens of the EQ-I 2.0 model. What I love about this model is that it does a great job of displaying a picture of emotional intelligence, or a snapshot essentially. So if we have emotional intelligence in the middle, and we see that the model is displayed in the form of a wheel. There are 5 different composites of emotional intelligence, and each composite is divided by a white line with an arrow showing how they're related to one another. And so there's no particular way to start, or there's no starting point or no ending point essentially with the model. However, I like to start at the top with self-perception. So if we start there, we'll see that how you perceive yourself and understanding yourself allows you to better express yourself, which then flows into the interpersonal realm and how you interact with others, which then leads to making good decisions. And then making the good decisions flows into how you manage your stress, which then flows right back into self-perception. So it's important to note that this model itself is dynamic in nature. Each facet really relies on the next. There's not one composite that is more important than the other. But if we take a step back and look at the outer layer in the gray area there of the wheel, it shows the emotional and social functioning and the performance, that the overall snapshot of emotional intelligence is also linked to your well-being. So I really want to focus most of our attention today on the interpersonal composite, as that relates mostly to healthy relationships, and we'll see how the skill of emotional intelligence plays its role in developing healthy relationships. But before I do that, I'd like to just touch briefly on the other 4 composites to just give you a little bit more context and give you a better understanding of what that looks like. And so the self-perception composite is this facet of emotional intelligence. It addresses the inner self. And so it's broken down into three subscales, and I like to think of self-regard as confidence. I like to think of self-actualization as the pursuit of meaning, passion, and purpose. And then the third subcomposite, is emotional self-awareness, which is essentially mindfulness. Now, the self-expression composite is an extension of self-perception. It addresses the outward expression of one's internal perception. And it's broken down into three subcomposites. And for each subcomposite, I essentially have a word or a phrase that helps me remember or better associate what the definition of each composite is. And so for emotional expression, that word is authentic. For assertiveness, I like to think of being direct with respect. And then for independence, I think of decisiveness. Now, the interpersonal realm measures the ability to develop and maintain relationships. And it can be broken down into three subcomponents, which is interpersonal relationships, which I consider as trust. Empathy, I consider to be respect. And then social responsibility, which is essentially being a team player. And then the decision-making realm addresses the way in which we use emotional information. And so it's further broken down into problem solving, which is the balance between people and processes. Reality testing, which is objective and unbiased. And then impulse control, which is essentially timing. Lastly, we have the stress management composite. Now, the stress management composite is comprised of three subcomposites of flexibility, stress tolerance, and optimism. And when I think about this composite as a whole, collectively I can combine all three, flexibility, stress tolerance, and optimism, and define it as resilience. The interpersonal realm is the composite of emotional intelligence that consists of the skill that will help us develop these healthy relationships. And so when we think about interpersonal realm, it's concerned with what are known as people skills. Whether people tend to be responsible and dependable. I think we all know people who we can, off the top of our head, call on and be like, oh, this person is dependable, this person is responsible. Also, it shows how we relate well to others, how we interact with others, how well we understand others. And then I think a big component of the interpersonal realm in relationships and healthy relationships in general is just trust, is that component of trust. If the trust is lacking, then the relationship 9 times out of 10 is going to be unhealthy. But if the trust is evident, then that's signs of a healthy relationships. And then also, how well do you function as part of a team? All things to consider. So thinking about interpersonal relationships, how you interact with other people, it's defined as the skill of developing and maintaining mutually satisfying relationships that are characterized by trust and compassion. So essentially, the healthy relationships are built on the foundation of trust and compassion. So looking at the composite of interpersonal relationships, I have a table here that compares somebody, or what it looks like with somebody who is low in the skill of interpersonal relationships compared to somebody who is high in the skill of interpersonal relationships. So when you look at the two, you see that somebody who is low in interpersonal relationships doesn't like intimacy. It's typically somebody who is not giving, not interested in relationships, one who is not able to share feelings, reserved, doesn't like to share at all, and typically they're loners. But if you contrast that with somebody who is high in the skill of the interpersonal relationships, now these are people that will relate well to other people, interact well with other people, understand other people better. You'll see somebody who has the ability to establish mutually satisfying relationships, one who has the ability to give and take affection and intimacy, that establishes that trust. You also see the ability to be able to maintain relationships over time. Um, Not only that, but somebody who is able to look positively at social change. And typically, when you're high in the skill of interpersonal relationships, most of the time you feel at ease in social situations. So, an activity to think about: if you think of 5 situations when you might need to introduce yourself to someone new, in each case, write down or share 5 different forms your introduction could take. So, this is something that if you want to do right now, you can pause and take a brief moment to write down those different 5 situations, or it's an activity that you can reflect on and carry out later. So, moving on to the second subcomponent of the interpersonal realm, we have empathy. Empathy is key in relationship building and healthy relationships because it's recognizing and understanding and appreciating how other people feel. Essentially, I think about empathy as putting yourself in someone else's shoe. It's different from sympathy, which sympathy is feeling sorry for somebody, but empathy is actually feeling and recognizing and understanding how that person feels. So, looking at empathy as a skill of emotional intelligence, let's compare it with somebody who's low in the skill to somebody who's high in the skill. So we have that table in front of us, and if we look at empathy from how it shows up with somebody who's low in the skill, it is somebody who has a difficulty understanding people's feelings. Somebody who's low also has a difficulty relating to other people. They're not able to put themselves in somebody else's shoe. And typically, that results in them being surprised by other people's reaction because they're having a difficult time relating and understanding to them. And then that shows itself in somebody misreading social cues. Now let's contrast that with somebody who's high in the skill of empathy. Well, it shows up as somebody who is sensitive to feelings of others. Not only that, but they are able to put themselves in the other person's shoes. They're able to feel, they're able to understand how that other person is feeling, what they're going through. And in essence, they can anticipate what others' reactions will be. And this also shows up as the ability to be able to pick up on those social cues. You're not surprised by them because you have shown that empathy to be able to anticipate and put yourself in somebody else's shoes. Here's an exercise that I think will give you practice and a tool that can help you develop the skill of empathy. So ask someone how they feel about a given topic. Let that conversation roll for a few minutes, and then once time is up, describe to the person your version of what they think and feel. So just take some time, whether you want to do that now or you want to do that after this presentation, and put that approach to empathy into action. See how well you do. Lastly, we have social responsibility, which, if you remember, we said was being a team player. And this is your willingly contributing to society, to one's social groups, and generally to the welfare of others. So like we did for the other 2 components of the interpersonal realm, let's compare the skill of social responsibility on the graph, or not the graph, the table below, with somebody who's low in the skill versus somebody who's high in the skill of social responsibility. And so looking at somebody who's low in the skill of social responsibility, you may have one who is unwilling to be involved in a group or a team. Somebody who's not a team player. They're hesitant to commit to group activities. I think you can think about those people that you work with, or those individuals that you have in class that are not great in group activities or group projects. And then you also have someone who has difficulty following through on group tasks. Versus somebody who's high in the skill of social responsibility, they're more cooperative. They're able to give and contribute to the group. It's productive. They're adding value. This also goes back to somebody who's responsible and dependable. They are able to built off of that foundation of trust. And in general, this is someone who feels genuine concern for others in a group, looking to the welfare of other people. So here is an activity related to social responsibility. I would like for you to write down 5 things you could do that would be appreciated by people in need. And as we recap the interpersonal realm, we see that the interpersonal realm has a huge impact on healthy relationships. I truly believe that healthy relationships are established on the foundation of trust and compassion. And so I want you to think about the different components of the interpersonal realm, the empathy, the social responsibility, and the interpersonal relationships, and how that plays out in your current relationships, and what impact that could have on the future relationships that you have, what you could be doing, how you could practice, how you could be implementing some of those composites and those skills into developing healthier relationships with the people that you're interacting with, or relationships that you have, and the relationships that you want to foster into becoming healthier relationships. Your emotional intelligence and healthy relationships will affect your well-being, and your general well-being is concerned with your ability to enjoy yourself and others. And it's defined really by the overall feelings of contentment or dissatisfaction that you have. And when we think about well-being in terms of emotional intelligence, there's 4 subscales that is most often associated with well-being. If we go back and think about that EQ-12.0 model that we were discussing, and those 4 subscales are self-regard, optimism, interpersonal relationships, and self-actualization. And interpersonal relationships, how you interact with others, how well you understand others, and how you relate to others will affect your overall general well-being. Thank you.